The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered onto the concrete floor of my auto shop, the metallic echo bouncing off the walls like a gunshot in the night. It was past midnight, and I was still here, still working, still avoiding the cold silence waiting for me at home. My name is Jake Morrison, and I used to think I knew my wife. The classic 1967 Mustang on the lift above me dripped oil like tears, each drop marking time in this God-forsaken place I called my sanctuary. Outside, the post-industrial wasteland of Millbrook stretched into darkness, abandoned factories, half-empty strip malls, and dreams that died with the steel mills 20 years ago. I wiped my hands on a rag and checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. Just like the past 32 days. Sophie hadn't spoken to me in over a month. Not a word, not a glance, not even acknowledgement that I existed in the same house as her. She'd perfected the art of moving through our suburban home like I was furniture. Something to navigate around but never actually see. The worst part? Our 17-year-old daughter Lila had started treating me the same way. "You're just a mechanic, Dad," she'd said last week, her voice dripping with the same contempt I heard in Sophie's silences. "Mom says you gave up on your dreams. Maybe that's why she's with someone who actually matters." The words had hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. With someone who actually matters, not, "Maybe that's why she doesn't talk to you," or "Maybe that's why she's angry." With someone. I'd been married to Sophie for 18 years. We'd built a life together in this fading Midwest town, raised our daughter, survived my tours overseas, and the nightmares that followed. I'd poured everything into my auto shop, Morrison's Classics, turning it into the most respected restoration garage in 3 counties. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and it was mine. But apparently, honest wasn't enough anymore. The shop's back door creaked open, and Vic Kowalski stepped into the fluorescent light, carrying 2 cups of coffee from his bar across the street. At 45, Vic looked like he'd been carved from the same weathered stone as this dying city. Broad shoulders, graying beard, and eyes that had seen too much during his 20 years as a cop before he'd opened Kowalski's tap. "You're gonna wear a hole in that floor, pacing around like that," he said, handing me a cup. "What's eating you tonight?" I took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible, just like everything else Vic served, but it was warm and real. Sophie came home today. From her business trip? That's what she called it. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken earlier, screenshots from a burner phone I'd found hidden in Sophie's gym bag 3 days ago. Explicit messages, hotel receipts, photos that made my stomach turn. All from someone named Ethan. Vic's expression darkened as he scrolled through them. "Jesus, Jake. How long has this been going on? Based on the timestamps, at least 6 months? Maybe longer?" I set down my coffee cup before my shaking hands could spill it. The business trip was to Chicago. Guess who else was in Chicago last month? Ethan Blackwood, her boss at Meridian Financial. "You confront her about it?" I tried. You know what she said when she walked through the door tonight? "So, lesson learned?" Like I was some disobedient dog who'd finally figured out his place. The rage that had been building for weeks threatened to overflow. I'd spent a month trying to save my marriage, flowers, dinner reservations, attempts at conversation that were met with eye rolls and sighs. I'd blamed myself, wondering what I'd done wrong, how I'd failed as a husband. But Sophie hadn't been pulling away because of something I'd done. She'd been pulling away because she'd already moved on to someone else. "What are you going to do?" Vic asked. I looked up at the Mustang, at the careful restoration work I'd been doing for months. Strip away the rust, rebuild the engine, make it better than it was before. Sometimes you had to tear something apart completely before you could put it back together. "I'm going to teach her a lesson," I said quietly. "And everyone who thinks they can treat Jake Morrison like he doesn't matter." Vic raised an eyebrow. "What kind of lesson?" I smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it felt genuine. The kind that sticks. The next morning I woke up to an empty house. Sophie had left early for work, and Lila was already at school. The silence felt different now, not oppressive, but full of possibility. I made coffee and sat at our kitchen table studying the evidence I'd gathered. The burner phone had been a gold mine, but I needed more. If I was going to do this right, I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. Sophie worked as a senior account manager at Meridian Financial, one of the few companies in Millbrook that was actually thriving. She'd started there 8 years ago as a junior associate and had clawed her way up the corporate ladder with the kind of ruthless ambition that I'd once admired. Ethan Blackwood was the regional vice president, a smooth-talking pretty boy from the East Coast who'd transferred to Millbrook 2 years ago. I'd met him exactly once, at the company Christmas party, where he'd shaken my hand with the kind of limp grip that told you everything you needed to know about a man. "So you're the mechanic," he'd said, his smile never reaching his eyes. "Sophie's told me so much about you." At the time, I'd thought nothing of it. Now I wondered exactly what Sophie had been telling him. I spent the morning making phone calls, reaching out to old contacts from my Army days who'd gone into private security and investigation. By noon, I had a clearer picture of Ethan Blackwood's life, his luxury condo downtown, his expensive habits, his pattern of business trips that coincided perfectly with Sophie's. But I also discovered something else, something that made my blood run cold. Camille Torres, Sophie's best friend and the head of HR at Meridian, had been feeding information to someone about the affair. Bank records showed regular payments from an offshore account to a private investigator, payments that started 6 months ago, right when Sophie and Ethan's relationship began. Someone had been orchestrating this. Someone had been pulling strings, manipulating events, and I was starting to suspect it wasn't Ethan. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Nice try with the private detective. Next time, stay in your lane." I stared at the message, feeling a chill run down my spine. Someone was watching me. Someone knew I was digging. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd threatened me. And Jake Morrison didn't respond well to threats. I locked up the shop early and drove across town to Kowalski's Tap. The bar was nearly empty in the afternoon light, just a few regulars nursing beers and watching a baseball game on the mounted TV. Vic was behind the bar, polishing glasses with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent years cleaning his service weapon. "You look like hell," he said as I sat down. "Someone's been watching me. They know I hired a PI. Vic set down the glass and leaned forward. "What do you want to do about it?" "I want to find out who's really running this show. Sophie's not smart enough to orchestrate something this elaborate, and Ethan's too arrogant to be this careful." "You think it's the friend? Camille?" "I think it's someone who wants to destroy Sophie as much as they want to destroy me. Someone who's been playing a long game." Vic reached under the bar and pulled out a manila folder. "Funny you should mention that. I did some digging of my own after you left last night. Take a look at this." The folder contained financial records, employment history, and a series of photographs. Camille Torres had been passed over for Sophie's promotion 3 times in the past 5 years. She'd filed complaints with corporate about Sophie's unprofessional conduct that had been dismissed, and she'd been having an affair with Ethan Blackwood for over a year, 6 months before Sophie ever entered the picture. She's been using Sophie to get to Ethan, I realized, setting up the affair, documenting it, probably planning to use it to destroy both of them and clear her path for promotion. "Except Sophie doesn't know she's being played," Vic added. "She thinks she's in love." I studied the photographs, Camille and Ethan in restaurants, hotels, parking garages. Always careful, always discreet. But the body language was unmistakable. This wasn't business. This was personal. "So, what's the plan?" Vic asked. I closed the folder and looked up at him. "We're going to give Camille exactly what she wants. We're going to destroy Sophie and Ethan's affair. And then we're going to destroy her. The Millbrook Community Center's annual fundraising gala was the social event of the year, a chance for the town's elite to dress up, drink expensive wine, and pretend they cared about charity while gossiping about their neighbors. Sophie had been looking forward to it for months. She'd bought a new dress, made an appointment at the salon, and spent weeks planning her entrance with Camille. It was going to be her debut as Ethan's unofficial +1, a public declaration of their relationship. She had no idea it was going to be her funeral. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing for this night. 3 weeks of careful planning, strategic positioning, and calling in favors from people who owed me from my army days. The beauty of being underestimated was that nobody saw you coming. I arrived at the gala early, dressed in the one good suit I owned, the same one I'd worn to my father's funeral 5 years ago. I looked like exactly what I was, a working-class mechanic trying to blend in with his betters. Perfect. The community center had been transformed for the evening. White tablecloths, flickering candles, and a small army of catered servers carrying trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. A projector screen had been set up at the front of the room for the evening's presentation about the new children's hospital wing. That projector was going to be the star of tonight's show. Sophie arrived at 7:30, stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than I made in a week. She was laughing at something Camille had said, her face glowing with the kind of happiness I hadn't seen in months. Ethan appeared at her side, impeccably dressed and carrying himself with the casual arrogance of a man who'd never been told no. He placed his hand on the small of Sophie's back, a gesture of ownership that made my jaw clench. They had no idea I was there. In my cheap suit and working man's hands, I was invisible to them. Just another face in the crowd. At 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed and the evening's program began. The mayor gave a speech about community values and the importance of supporting local health care. The hospital administrator talked about the new pediatric wing and how donations would help save children's lives. And then it was time for the multimedia presentation. I watched from the back of the room as the projector flickered to life, displaying images of the proposed hospital wing, architectural renderings, artists' concepts, smiling children in hospital beds. But something went wrong with the presentation. The images began to glitch, static lines running across the screen. The hospital administrator tapped the microphone, apologizing for the technical difficulties. And then the screen filled with a different kind of image entirely. Security camera footage from Meridian Financial's executive conference room. Timestamp. 2 weeks ago, 6:30 p.m. The image was grainy but unmistakable. Sophie and Ethan in a passionate embrace, his hands tangled in her hair, her dress hiked up around her waist. The room erupted in shocked gasps and whispers. Someone screamed. I heard Sophie's voice, high and panicked. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" But the footage kept playing. Different angles, different dates. A greatest hits compilation of Sophie and Ethan's affair played out in high definition for 300 of Millbrook's most prominent citizens. I saw Camille push through the crowd toward the projector, her face a mask of fury. She knew exactly what was happening, and she knew who was responsible. But she was too late. The damage was done. Security guards finally managed to shut down the projector, but the silence that followed was deafening. 300 pairs of eyes turned toward Sophie and Ethan, who stood frozen in the middle of the room like deer in headlights. Ethan recovered first, his corporate training kicking in. "This is obviously some kind of malicious attack," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Someone has violated our privacy and—" "Your privacy?" The voice came from somewhere in the crowd, loud enough for everyone to hear. "What about your employees' privacy? What about the company's reputation?" More voices joined in. Questions, accusations, demands for answers. The crowd was turning ugly, and Sophie looked like she was about to collapse. I watched Ethan scan the room, his eyes searching for the source of his humiliation. When his gaze passed over me, I gave him a small smile and a casual wave. His face went white. "You!" he snarled, pushing through the crowd toward me. "You son of a bitch, what did you do?" The room fell silent again, all attention focused on the confrontation that was about to unfold. I straightened my tie and smiled wider. "I didn't do anything, Ethan. I'm just here for the charity auction. Though I have to say, that was quite a presentation. Very educational." He swung at me, a wild haymaker that I saw coming from a mile away. I stepped aside easily, and his momentum carried him stumbling into a table full of champagne glasses. The crash was spectacular. Security moved in immediately, grabbing Ethan by both arms as he struggled to get back to his feet. His expensive suit was soaked with champagne and spotted with blood from a small cut on his forehead. "Get your hands off me," he shouted. "Do you know who I am?" "Yeah," one of the security guards replied. "You're the guy getting thrown out." As they dragged Ethan toward the exit, he turned back to glare at me one final time. "This isn't over, Morrison." I cupped my hand to my ear. "Sorry, can't hear you over the sound of your career ending." The crowd actually laughed. A few people even applauded. But when I looked around for Sophie, she was gone. And so was Camille. The real game was just beginning. Sophie didn't come home that night, or the next night, or the night after that. Lila, however, had plenty to say about the gala. She'd heard about it from her friends, seen the social media posts, watched her mother become the laughingstock of Millbrook in real time. "How could you do that to her?" she screamed at me across the kitchen table, her face red with tears and rage. "How could you humiliate her like that?" "I didn't humiliate her, Lila. She humiliated herself. I just made sure everyone could see it." "She's your wife. You're supposed to protect her, not destroy her." The words hung in the air between us like a physical thing. For a moment, I saw my daughter clearly, not the sullen teenager who'd been treating me like garbage for months, but the scared kid who was watching her family fall apart. But then I remembered Sophie's smirk, her casual cruelty, the way she'd made me feel like nothing for months while she played house with another man. "Your mother made her choice, Lila. She chose to throw away 18 years of marriage for a man who was using her. I just made sure she understood the consequences." "You're a monster," she whispered. Maybe I was, but I was a monster who was just getting started. Sophie finally came home on Thursday evening, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was limp and unwashed, her designer clothes wrinkled and stained. She moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact and speaking in monosyllables. The fallout from the gala had been swift and brutal. Ethan had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into his conduct. Sophie had been reassigned to a junior position in the accounting department, a humiliating demotion that everyone understood was the first step toward being fired. But the social consequences had been even worse. In a town like Millbrook, reputation was everything, and Sophie's reputation was in ruins. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. The country club had lost her membership application. Even the grocery store clerks whispered and pointed when she shopped. She was learning what it felt like to be invisible, to be treated like she didn't matter. I found her in the living room that evening, sitting in the dark and staring at nothing. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "So," I said, settling into my recliner across from her. "Lesson learned?" She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Jake, please, we need to talk." "Now you want to talk? After ignoring me for over a month?" "I made a mistake. You made a choice. A series of choices. For months." She started crying then, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. Ethan, he made me feel special, important." "More important than your family?" "No. God, no. I was lost. I felt trapped, like my life was passing me by, like I was just Jake Morrison's wife instead of Sophie Morrison, you know?" I did know. I'd felt the same way sometimes, wondering if I'd settled for too little, if there was something more out there waiting for me. But I'd never acted on those feelings. I'd never betrayed the people who loved me. "Where have you been staying?" I asked. "Camille's apartment. She's been helping me through this." Of course she had. Camille had been playing the supportive friend, offering Sophie a shoulder to cry on, while secretly orchestrating her destruction. It was almost artistic in its cruelty. "Sophie, there's something you need to know about Camille." I pulled out the folder Vic had compiled, spreading the photographs and financial records across the coffee table. Sophie's face went through a series of expressions as she processed what she was seeing: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally, rage. "She's been sleeping with Ethan for over a year," I explained. "Before you, during you, probably after you. She set up your entire affair, documented it, and then used it to destroy both of you. She's been playing you from the beginning." Sophie stared at a photograph of Camille and Ethan kissing in a hotel parking lot, the timestamp showing it was taken just 3 days ago, while Sophie had been crying on Camille's couch about her ruined life. "Why?" she whispered. "Because she wanted your job, your position, your life, and she was willing to destroy you to get it." Sophie's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. "What is it?" I asked. She showed me the screen. The message was from Camille. "Emergency at the office. Need you here now. Don't tell anyone where you're going." I looked at Sophie, seeing the fear in her eyes. She was finally beginning to understand how deep this conspiracy went, how thoroughly she'd been manipulated and betrayed. "Jake," she said quietly, "I think I'm in real danger." For the first time in months, I believed her. The Meridian Financial Building was dark except for the security lights in the lobby. Sophie's hands shook as she used her key card to access the elevator, and I could hear her breathing getting faster and more shallow as we rode up to the executive floor. "Maybe we should call the police," she whispered. "And tell them what? That your best friend might be planning to hurt you? They'll think you're paranoid." The elevator dinged softly as we reached the 20th floor. The hallway was empty, but I could see light coming from under the door of the main conference room. We walked quietly down the carpeted hallway, our footsteps muffled but our heartbeats loud in the silence. As we got closer to the conference room, I could hear voices: Camille's voice, sharp and angry, and a man's voice that I recognized as Ethan's. "Told you to keep her under control," Ethan was saying. "This whole situation is spiraling out of control." "I had it under control until her husband decided to play detective," Camille replied. "We need to cut our losses and move to Phase 2. Phase 2 wasn't supposed to happen for another 6 months. We don't have the offshore account set up yet. Then we'll make do with what we have. Sophie knows too much now, and Morrison's not going to stop digging. We need to eliminate both problems." Sophie grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. The word "eliminate" hung in the air like a death sentence. I pulled out my phone and started recording, then gestured for Sophie to stay quiet. We needed to hear more. "What about the girl?" Ethan asked. "Lila? She's 17, she'll be fine. Tragic car accident, parents both dead, but she'll inherit everything. And guess who's been named as her legal guardian in Sophie's will?" My blood turned to ice. They weren't just planning to steal money from Meridian Financial. They were planning to kill us and take custody of our daughter. "The brakes on Morrison's truck are already compromised," Camille continued. "It'll look like mechanical failure. Happens all the time to mechanics who don't maintain their own vehicles." That's when I realized we'd walked into a trap. Camille hadn't texted Sophie because she needed help. She'd texted Sophie because she wanted both of us in the same place at the same time. The conference room door opened, and Camille stepped into the hallway. She was no longer the polished HR professional I'd known for years. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and her eyes had the wild look of someone who'd gone too far to turn back. "Hello, Sophie," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Jake, so nice of you both to join us." Ethan appeared behind her, holding something in his right hand that glinted in the hallway light. A knife. "You couldn't just leave it alone, could you, Morrison?" he said. "You had to keep digging, keep asking questions. Do you have any idea how much money you've cost me?" "Apparently not enough," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Since you're still breathing." He lunged forward with the knife, but I was ready for him. 18 months of combat training in Afghanistan had taught me how to fight for my life, and muscle memory kicked in automatically. I grabbed his wrist and twisted, hearing the satisfying crack of breaking bone as he screamed and dropped the weapon. A quick knee to his solar plexus doubled him over, and an elbow to the back of his neck sent him to the floor. Camille was already running toward the emergency exit, but Sophie was faster. Months of yoga classes and marathon training paid off as she tackled her former best friend to the ground, both women hitting the carpet hard. "You bitch!" Sophie screamed, grabbing Camille by the hair. "You destroyed my life! You destroyed my family!" "Your family was already broken," Camille screamed back. "You were miserable. You hated your boring life and your boring husband and your boring little town. I gave you excitement. I gave you passion." "You gave me lies." I called 911 while Sophie and Camille fought on the floor, and within minutes the building was swarming with police officers. Ethan was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon, and Camille was charged with conspiracy to commit murder after the police found detailed plans in her office for staging our accident. The financial crimes investigation would take months to unravel completely, but the initial evidence suggested that Camille and Ethan had been embezzling money from client accounts for over 2 years, using their affair and Sophie's unwitting participation as cover for their activities. As we gave our statements to the police, I watched Sophie's face in the harsh fluorescent light of the conference room. She looked older somehow, worn down by the weight of everything that had happened. "Jake," she said quietly, as the police finished up. "What happens now?" I looked at my wife, really looked at her for the first time in months. The woman who had betrayed me, humiliated me, and nearly gotten us both killed. The woman who was also the mother of my daughter and the person I'd loved for 18 years. "Now we go home," I said, "and we figure out if there's anything left worth saving." 3 months later, I was back in my shop, working on the same 1967 Mustang that had been my companion through the darkest period of my life. The restoration was almost complete. New paint, rebuilt engine, perfect chrome bumpers that reflected the afternoon sunlight streaming through the garage windows. Sophie and I were in counseling. It was awkward, painful work, like setting a broken bone that had healed wrong and needed to be rebroken before it could heal properly. Some days I thought we might make it. Other days I wondered why I was even trying. Lila had started talking to me again, though our relationship was still fragile. Learning that her mother's best friend had planned to murder her parents and steal her inheritance had been a sobering experience. She was seeing her own therapist now, working through the trauma of watching her family implode and rebuild itself in real time. The door to the shop opened, and Vic walked in carrying his usual offering of terrible coffee and local gossip. "Heard from the prosecutor today," he said, handing me a cup. "Camille took a plea deal. 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, and about 15 other charges." "What about Ethan?" 30 years. Apparently they found evidence that this wasn't his first time running this kind of scam. He's got victims in 3 other states. I took a sip of the coffee and made my usual face of disgust. "Any word on when we'll see our money back?" "The feds recovered about 60% of what they stole. You and Sophie should get most of your savings back, plus damages." That was something, at least. The financial hit had been brutal. Legal fees, counseling costs, and the loss of Sophie's income while she looked for a new job had nearly bankrupted us. But we were surviving. "How are things at home?" Vic asked. "Better. Different, but better. We're talking now, really talking. Sophie's been honest about what happened, about why it happened." "And?" I set down my coffee and picked up a wrench, turning it over in my hands. She was right about some things. I had gotten complacent. I was taking her for granted, taking our marriage for granted. I thought as long as I worked hard and provided for my family, that was enough. But it wasn't. No, it wasn't. She needed to feel valued, appreciated, seen. And I wasn't doing that. That doesn't excuse what she did. No, it doesn't, but it explains it. And explanation is the first step toward forgiveness. Vic nodded, understanding the weight of what I was saying. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing. It was about choosing to move forward instead of staying trapped in the past. What about Lila? She's applying to colleges, wants to study criminal justice, if you can believe that. Says she wants to help people who've been betrayed and manipulated. Like her parents. Like her parents. The shop door opened again, and Sophie walked in. She looked different now, older, more serious, but also more real somehow. The polished corporate mask was gone, replaced by something more genuine. "How's the job search going?" Vic asked her. "Good, actually. I have an interview next week with a nonprofit that helps small businesses get started. The pay's not great, but the work seems meaningful." She walked over to the Mustang and ran her hand along the freshly painted fender. "It's beautiful, Jake. You did an amazing job." "Thanks. I've been thinking about what to do with it." "Sell it?" "Actually, I was thinking about giving it to Lila, for graduation." Sophie's eyes widened. "Jake, this car is worth more than we paid for our house." "I know, but she's worth it. And maybe it's time I stopped holding on to the past and started investing in the future." Sophie smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in over a year. "I think that's a wonderful idea." Vic finished his coffee and headed for the door. "I'll leave you two alone. Try not to burn the place down." After he left, Sophie and I stood in comfortable silence, looking at the restored Mustang. It had taken months of careful work to bring it back to life, stripping away the rust and damage, rebuilding it piece by piece, not unlike what we were doing with our marriage. "Jake," Sophie said quietly, "do you think we're going to make it?" I considered the question seriously. The betrayal was still there, a scar that would never completely fade. The trust we'd built over 18 years had been shattered and would need to be rebuilt from scratch. There would be good days and bad days, progress and setbacks. But we were both here. We were both trying. And sometimes, that was enough. "I think we have a chance," I said finally, "if we both keep working at it." She nodded and took my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine. They felt familiar but different, like everything else in our new life. Outside, the sun was setting over Millbrook, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The town was changing too. New businesses opening, young families moving in, hope replacing the despair that had settled over the place like dust. Change was possible. Redemption was possible. Even for people like us who'd lost their way and had to fight to find it again. I squeezed Sophie's hand and smiled. "Come on, let's go home." And for the first time in months, home felt like the right place to be.